And I guess since I'm the moderator for this panel, I will start by introducing this session. In this panel, we're going to focus on the Spokane River, PCBs, and a process called a water quality variance, which is being used to potentially relax standards for meeting PCB limits. So we've got two speakers, and I'm hoping to have both of them speak, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So if we have any time left, I will ask both you guys questions. We're going to start with Jerry White. Jerry is the Spokane Riverkeeper and has been tracking issues of the Spokane River and PCBs for many years. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry White.
All right, thank you, Rick. Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get into a PowerPoint for you. So hopefully you can see the screen here. And just as Rick said, I'm going to be presenting on Spokane River variances for PCB pollution, specifically discharger variances, and we'll get into just exactly what those are in a second. First of all, a little bit about me. I am the Spokane Riverkeeper, so I'm a nonprofit advocate for the Spokane River and the public uses of the river. A few facts about the Spokane River. The Spokane River is in eastern Washington and northern Idaho. It's about 111 miles long. Now I've got it. Here we go. So about 111 miles long, and there are 7 hydro projects on it, 6 of which are owned by Vista Utilities, and then a 7th one is the city of Spokane. Our river runs from Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho all the way down to the Columbia River. Its confluence at the Columbia, and is underlain by the Spokane Valley Rafton Prairie Aquifer, which is a huge source of fresh water. So Lake Coeur d'Alene and the aquifer are both sources for that river. What's important to this discussion is that you know there are 5 major discharger permits, or NPDES permits, to the river. There are actually far more minor NPDES permits, but 5 major permits. Also, a little bit about the river. The river down near the confluence with the Columbia River flows through the Spokane Indian Reservation. And the Spokane tribe is a sovereign nation with the power to delegated authority to create water quality standards, and they have done so for the parameter of PCBs and actually in a lot of other parameters. The river is impounded in several places. This is Lake Spokane, backed up by a dam called the Long Lake Dam and a Vista project. But there are free-flowing stretches, such as this one through the city of Spokane, where the famous Spokane Falls is, and was once the site of a huge tribal fishery. The Spokane tribe at one time harvested nearly 150,000 salmon annually. These were mostly Chinook salmon. And the fish consumption rate of folks was close to 2 pounds a day. And nearly 60% of the diet of tribal members were salmon or fish. Unfortunately, today the river is very polluted with polychlorinated biphenyls, or the acronym is PCBs. Pollution of the Spokane River has created a situation wherein the river is actually put on the 303D list. It's classified as impaired for PCB pollution. PCBs were a terrible, actually they were an industrially created chlorinated chemical that was used commonly in things like transformer oils, in rolling mill oils, and they were readily discharged to the ground and to the river and they have a very long half-life. They don't break down. And they're very harmful to aquatic life and very harmful to all biological life. They actually are a carcinogen, and they cause endocrine disruption as well, like hormone issues. In the Spokane River, we have many of these legacy pollutants. These PCBs were banned in 1979. We still see a lot of them coming through that are either inadvertently produced in the inks and pigments or are just legacy toxic from the old days. And these things, as I said, get into the sediments, and then water is passed through those sediments and enter the river through groundwater. We also have sources that are through wastewater effluent. And so these 5 large municipal and industrial wastewater treatment plants are still discharging PCBs to our river. The photograph here is actually of the wastewater treatment plant for the city of Spokane. This has caused a situation where PCBs have bioaccumulated in the environment and have stored up in fish. So I just took a screenshot of the Department of Health website in Washington where you can see that almost all species of fish have PCBs accumulated in their flesh, and there are advisories not to eat those fish. So I want to talk just for a very quick second about how water quality standards are derived for toxic pollution. In the case of PCBs, a water quality standard is developed through the development of a human health criteria and a fish consumption rate. So the fish consumption rate is an assumption about how many fish people eat per day, and the cancer risk rate has to do with how much fish in that assumed level of fish consumption you can eat and get cancer. And this then these are the numbers that are used to determine how many of these chemicals can actually be in the water column, and that's the standard. It should not be exceeded, right? And then those standards are folded into the pollution permits or the NPDES permits. So, and this is an effort to control the bioaccumulation of toxins up the food chain and protect the uses of fishing and eating fish. Now, you can see here that there's 4 different squares. We're going to concentrate on the 2 left. The bottom one with the red frame is 175 grams of fish. Just above that is 6.5 grams of fish. This is important because the water quality standard right now assumes that you eat 6.5 grams of fish per day. For some time, the assumption was 175 grams, which protected up to 95% of the population. Please do remember the tribal fish consumption rate of 2 pounds per day, or nearly 360, it's actually 865 grams per day. So quickly, the epic story here is that the water quality standard in 2016 that was put forward by Washington State was at 6.5 grams of fish per day, and it was woefully inadequate. EPA had 10 years of science saying, look, people eat far more fish than that a day, specifically tribal members and tribal communities, and we need to have a water quality standard that protects that fish consumption. So they promulgated 7 parts per quadrillion, or 7 picograms per liter. This is a very tight standard for PCBs. But unfortunately, in 2017, an industry-backed coalition put a petition together, rescinded that water quality standard. The EPA listened, it got traction, and in June of 2020, we ended up with a toxic standard that's back to 170 parts per quadrillion. So if you remember, that's that little teeny piece of fish by the fork, 6.5 grams a day. That's the assumption of what people eat. If you eat more than that, you're not protected. The dischargers along our river are Kaiser Aluminum, Inland Empire Paper, the city of Spokane, and you can see that Kaiser here on the left side is discharging well over 1,000 picograms per liter. Remember, the water quality standard right now, even the rolled back standard, is 170 picograms per liter. So these dischargers are far and away in violation of the water quality standards currently in place, not to mention the much stronger and more stringent EPA rule that was rolled back. So there's some dissonance, right? We have dischargers that are discharging a great deal of PCBs into the river. The river is impaired for PCBs. So the agencies have been in dialogue with dischargers, and a tool often known as a compliance tool called a Discharger Variance has been put into service here. And the EPA, these tools were approved in 2015 by the EPA, and now Washington State Department of Ecology has encouraged their use in our watershed for the pollution, for PCB pollution. So there's these 5 large dischargers that have variance applications sitting on a shelf and being looked at over at the Department of Ecology. And a variance basically is a time-limited exception to the water quality standard. So it's a different designated use or standard for that water body. It's a rule that's used for a specific pollutant, a specific water body, in our case, the Spokane River, and is supposed to reflect the highest attainable condition that a particular operation can get their effluent to. That is, the cleanest you can get your effluent for PCBs. And, you know, right now, we are looking at dischargers that have put forward numbers like anywhere from 500 picograms per liter right on up to 1,000 picograms per liter for the highest achievable condition or highest attainable condition that they can make put in the river. I'm going to move past some slides because I know I'm always trying to stuff a lot into a short time. What I want folks to walk away with is an understanding of kind of the heart of a variance, which is this highest attainable condition, or the HAC. Now, what the highest attainable condition in a variance is basically it's that, you know, that highest or I should say the best level of cleanup that an operation or a wastewater treatment plant can get to for PCBs in their wastewater discharge. And the other very critical piece of a variance is called a pollutant minimization program or pollutant minimization plan. Those are all the best management practices, the things that you will do that will be in your application if you're a discharger, and you will do to try to prevent PCBs from getting into your wastewater. Things like sweeping the streets would be a municipal pollutant minimization plan, right? So if a discharger can identify the best available condition, and they can identify the pollutant control activities that will be implemented, you know, then they can go ahead and submit a variance application. There are numerous other kinds of variances in the United States. We have temperature variances in Colorado. There are mercury variances in the Great Lakes and even in Oregon. And Montana has some has a statewide nutrient variance. But we've never seen a variance for polychlorinated biphenyls in the United States. So this is a new type of variance that would actually change that human health criteria that controls biomagnification of PCBs in the food chain. This is particularly troubling, and I think Dan Rey-Bear will address this. This is particularly troubling for downstream sovereign nations and delegated authorities who have created water quality standards that reflect their own fish consumption rates and fish consumption heritages and traditions. So the Spokane tribe has a water quality standard of 1.3 parts per quadrillion or picograms per liter. Remember, the state standard is at 170. So that's a very highly protective standard that protects that very high fish consumption rate and we don't know how these variances for PCBs will contribute to the Spokane tribe meeting this standard of 1.3 picograms per liter. So we have a number of open questions about these variances. Frankly, the highest attainable condition is a technical limit. So what these variances allow is the toggling over from a limit that protects human health to a technical limit that protects an operation of a wastewater discharger. The applications, 4 of these applications are for 20 years. That's an excessive amount of time in our view as a water quality advocate. And then finally, they begin to undo that regulatory pressure that has been the dynamic that's allowed us historically to make change. That is, we set high standards, and then those wastewater operations strive to meet those high standards, and that has driven progress to get us to clean water. Variances may not get there. So, this represents then a profound and historic choice before us. Is it a road to clean water or a road to nowhere? And really, with that, I'd like to go ahead and cede the field here to Dan, and he can pick up the trail from there. Thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Hi there. Before I get into my presentation, I'd actually like to ask a question of Gary, if that's okay.
Sure.
Gary, there was a recent decision that some people in our group may have heard about regarding TMDL. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that just very briefly, because I think that is relevant to this as well, and it helps provide valuable context for this discussion.
Right. Well, I didn't get into that in this presentation, but in this fork in the road, one side is a variance, and very clearly the other side is the tool that the Clean Water Act had really developed and designed to address these kinds of pollution problems, which is called a total maximum daily load, or TMDL. The TMDL assigns a budget for pollution and then works backwards from that total budget, pollution budget, to assign pollution numbers, basically numbers to each wastewater discharger, saying you can't make, given the big number of loading, you can't exceed this particular number out of your pipe. Right now, there is a legal struggle going on in which the Spokane tribe and the Sierra Club has challenged the EPA and said, look, you need to develop a TMDL for the Spokane River. We currently do not have a TMDL. We have no total loading number for our river in any given day, even though it's clearly impaired. So recently a decision came through that sort of affirmed this case that in fact the EPA should begin to develop a TMDL. It has promised to do so. So the variance is clearly outside of that conversation and represents a sort of a tangential way of addressing this when we haven't yet even written a TMDL. And I think now there is hope that with this latest ruling that by Judge Rothstein that, in fact, the Sierra Club and the Spokane tribe will get some traction in pressing the federal government to demand that the state write a TMDL for PCBs. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm at.
It does. What I just wanted to highlight for all the attendees today is that there are sort of multiple moving pieces in this, and that the variances is just one part of it, and there's another part that is very active right now as well. So I'm going to go to my presentation now. Sorry, let me...
While you're getting there, I'll just add that the TMDL waste load allocations, those numbers that are pinned to each pipe are very, very important. and the variance numbers that would be pinned to each pipe are very different and far more lenient.
Yes. So, as was noted before, my name is Daniel Rey-Bear. I'm an attorney in Spokane, Washington. I and my partner at our law firm, we specialize in representing Indian tribes for about 25 years. My partner and I both have separately worked at the Environmental Protection Agency in D.C. at their Office of General Counsel on tribal issues, including treatment of the state and jurisdictional issues. And I was recently involved in some work with Jerry regarding the Spokane River Water Quality Standards variances. So Jerry has talked about the technical side of things. I am going to give a sort of very succinct, very condensed, for a short period of time, presentation about legal issues regarding this. So the technical side is very much part of it, but this goes on top of that. So what limits apply to the adoption and the approval of variances? So there are two specific parts of this, and I say adoption and approval because the variances are adopted by the state of Washington Department of Ecology. So they've been applied for by these 5 dischargers, and the applications were to the Department of Ecology. They would issue discharger-specific variances. If the state adopts them, EPA then has to approve them. And so there are 5 limits that I've basically identified here, and I've grouped them, 1 at the top, 3 in the middle, and then 1 down at the bottom. The first one at the top is specific to the state's adoption of them, and that is that the state has to mandate the designated uses and the criteria if they are achievable. Assuming that the state does that, or if the state does that, then EPA has to review it and approve it, or consider whether to approve it. So what are some of the things that apply to EPA's approval? Well, it first has to verify that those variances will comply with downstream tribal water quality standards. And it has to do this after consultation with those downstream tribes if they have treatment of state status, such as the Spokane tribe. In addition, EPA, in its approval, needs to protect fish consumption use if feasible. And thirdly, EPA needs to require the highest attainable condition, the HAC, and not lower water quality. So, assuming the state approves, or if the state approves, and if the state adopts, and if EPA approves, what then? Well, downstream tribes with treatment of state can object. So let's get into the specifics. This is the first thing. As I noted, the state, when it adopts the variances, it has to maintain designated uses and criteria if achievable. And I've cited specific regulations here for reference. Don't take my word. You can look it up. You can have this for reference if you want to get involved in these issues or be aware of them in case they arise near you. Under that particular regulation, 40 CFR 131.14A4, a state may not adopt water quality standards variances if the designated uses and criteria addressed by the applicable water quality standard can be achieved by implementing the technology-based effluent limits that are already separately required under the Clean Water Act. So this is a very specific technical standard that applies for the state's adoption decision. So the state has gotten the applications, they've gotten comments. This is one of the key things, if not the key thing, that the state is doing in making its decision. So if the state adopts this, what then? Well, EPA, in its approving it, it can require upstream jurisdictions and dischargers to comply with more stringent downstream tribal water quality standards. Now, what has been mentioned before in this presentation by Jerry and me is the Spokane tribe, which has its own water quality standards. But in addition to that, there are further downstream water quality standards. The Spokane River doesn't just go off the face of the earth. Once it ends, it flows into the Columbia River. And while the Colville tribes don't have their own water quality standards, there are actually federally issued water quality standards for the Colville Reservation. Now, it's perhaps not yet certain whether the tribe can rely on the federally issued water quality standards for its reservation, but I think the answer is yes, it should be able to. So in addition to having to satisfy the Spokane tribe's own water quality standards, the Colville tribe's water quality standards should be satisfied, and the Colville tribes should be complaining about it. So again, I've cited specific regulations here. Now, in these in EPA's approval decision, they have to address how those variances would affect stricter downstream tribal water quality standards following timely and meaningful tribal consultation. So there's not a specific regulation regarding this, but EPA has a tribal consultation policy, which you all hopefully know about. So EPA, if it hasn't done it yet, once it gets the state approval or adoption, if it adopts, it should be getting into that following consultation. So what's the next thing? Protect the fish consumption use if feasible. So the standards are set based on the fish consumption. That's the designated use. Fish consumption use is a specific use in Clean Water Section 101. I've included the EPA site here in the Federal Register for where they specifically talked about this. So under the regulation, EPA must disapprove the variance if it affects fish consumption use if attaining the designated use is feasible. Now, obviously, that is a technical issue which will have to be addressed. The dischargers naturally say it is not feasible. For those on the other side, they have to respond that say it is feasible. And this applies throughout the term of the variance. So finally, what EPA needs to do is require the highest attainable condition, the HAC, and to not lower water quality. And so again, I've included a specific regulatory site here. They need to disapprove the variances if the requirements either don't represent the HAC for the applicable body water or the water body segment throughout the term of the variance, or if it would result in any lowering of the currently attainable ambient water quality. The point of this last one is the variance is a variance from that standard that can't be met, but it's not an excuse or an allowance to allow the water to get worse than it already is. And so it's imperative that it not be worse. So what then happens if the state adopts and EPA approves? Well, downstream tribes with water quality standards, in particular the Spokane tribe, which has treatment as a state, can object to those upstream discharges or to the variances to protect their designated uses. And there's a specific Federal Court of Appeals decision that addresses this. So this is spelled out in the regulations through EPA's dispute resolution mechanism, sanctioned by court, and hopefully things won't get to it, but if they do, that's what's there.
Hi,
So,
Daniel. Oh, perfect timing. I was just going to say we have our next presentation here in a moment, but I'll let you go because it's perfect.
So just to wrap up, I know we're on short time here. If folks want to have specific questions for for Dan or Jerry, I know we don't have time, please get in touch with me or post them on the chat, and I can get those over to them. So with that, I just want to thank Jerry and Dan for sharing information here, and appreciate the time. Thanks.
Goodness,
Thank you.
geez. And thank you, Rick, for your contributions today. I appreciate all of you. All right, so we're going to... Thank you, Jerry.